So I haven't been working as much as I should be on my videos recently, and mostly that's because I got addicted to video games, primarily Planet Zoo. I'm sorry, I fucking love zoo games, like Zoo Tycoon, um, like all of the zoo games. I have them all. But yeah, I fucking love Planet Zoo. And as we all know, the most important part of Planet Zoo is not making your zoo as pretty as possible. It's not taking care of your animals and making them happy. It's not completing the challenges. The most important part of Planet Zoo is installing as many mods as you can without crashing the game. That's the main point. You could play the game just straight up, but also, if you play the game straight up, you can't put dinosaurs in your zoo. And you just have to concentrate on what's important in your life, you know? And that is having dinosaurs in Planet Zoo. But I've been neglecting my YouTube videos, so I figure, maybe we could kill two birds with one stone, and I could play Planet Zoo for you and do one of those video game YouTube videos that everybody really likes. So yeah, so we're gonna play some Planet fucking Zoo. Alright, see what mods do I got right now. I got Myosaura, Parasaurolophus, Triceratops, Centaurosaurus, and of course Edmontosaurus and Nanosaurus. That's a lot of mods. I think that's 6. Let's hope this little guy can handle it. It did not like all the mods. I think I'm just gonna have to add the mods in one at a time, so every time I need to add a new dinosaur, I'll just close the game and restart it with a new mod in there. Alrighty. Here we are. Alright. Obviously the most important part at the beginning is picking which path we're gonna use. How about I just not hurt myself and stick with tasteful asphalt? I used to like to do my zoos in a super strict grid, but now lately I've been liking swirly zoos. So obviously my zoo is going to be a communist zoo, so the staff paths are of course going to have to be red. You know what? No, I like purple better. We don't have to be too on theme, you know. And of course the price of admission is going to be free. And you know what? You can do that. You can make a communist zoo on sandbox mode. I already took 20 years building my own versions of staff facilities, my own mods. I built this one a couple days ago. You had to have lots of different staff buildings. You had to have ones for places for the zookeepers, and you have to have places where the staff can go on break, and basically I realized that what I'm playing is a bourgeoisie simulator. That's the whole point. The fantasy is being a bourgeois overlord, and I just have crazy billionaire money that I can do whatever I want with, including building a communist zoo. And the whole thing is a horrible contradiction, because if it's just one person making the decisions about how it works, it's by definition not communist. So I was wondering, does that mean that Planet Zoo is reactionary? Think about the first games that we had in this genre. We had Roller Coaster Tycoon and Zoo Tycoon. The whole selling point was that you were a mega capitalist. And the appeal was that you could build this capitalist empire. It's a bourgeoisie simulator is what it is. And that's the fantasy that it's selling, is just the opportunity to have power over a workplace in which dozens of people work and in a public space that thousands of people visit. So I guess it is kind of reactionary in that regard. I thought there was another quarantine building that I had. Isn't there one more building? Might have to add it to the blueprint later. And so that's what the fantasy is. It's a power fantasy, these games. And are power fantasies inherently bad? I think in some ways, yeah, definitely, because, the last thing we need to be doing right now is making workers feel more confused about where they sit in class-based society. It's not empowering to imagine yourself in power. What's empowering is having a realistic assessment of your situation, understanding who your true friends and enemies are, so that you can make decisions that actually do empower you in a very practical way. And I guess encouraging working class people to identify with bourgeois overlord is not necessarily a healthier thing in terms of class consciousness and class struggle. Some more blueprints that I built ahead of time. And I don't know, I feel kind of bad when I play this game sometimes, because I just rule over everything with an iron fist. Do the little NPC workers hate me? Do they just tolerate me? I don't know. One thing I think is kind of interesting about this game is that, even though it lets you be a bourgeois overlord, it doesn't necessarily let you get away with anything you want. Of course, you can always change the sandbox settings so that you can get away with anything you want. You can change it so that various different negative consequences for your actions or troubles that you might face just don't happen. And whatever, it's a fucking sandbox game, so the fun about video games is that they challenge you the exact amount that you need to be challenged at that particular moment in your life. But they highlight what sort of things happen when the bourgeoisie behave badly. For example, if you don't take care of your animals, if you are too cheap and don't pay attention to their needs, protesters show up at your zoo. If you fire a staff member, then what happens is, the staff member doesn't just disappear. They become just another NPC, like a guest, and you can still click on them and see their thoughts as they're walking out of the zoo, and you can see how angry and upset they are that they got fired, and they're like, I'm so mad I got fired. So they make you live with that, man. They make you live with, the fact that you did that to somebody. If you overwork your staff, if they're tired all the time and they don't get adequate breaks and they're understaffed, they get super stressed and upset and they can actually quit. I've never had a staff member quit on me in the game, but I guess I'm not horribly mismanaging things as badly as maybe some other players might. Yeah, they don't necessarily just let you get away with doing whatever you want. Unless, of course, you want to. Because, in sandbox mode, you can change the settings to get rid of all of that realism. Oh no, that's not what I wanted. This isn't looking nearly as nice as I wanted it to. Okay. I think that's just gonna... Okay, we're just gonna get rid of all this. No. Chaos. I'm not very good at economic planning, am I? But another interesting decision is, even though you have consequences for being too nasty and exploitive, they also encourage exploitive behavior too in the game, which is weird. For example, if you, and this is super annoying, but if you set ticket prices too low, then you constantly have to get notifications that guests think the tickets are underpriced. And of course, if you click on the guests and see their thoughts, they're always happy when the tickets are underpriced. But it still comes up as a negative notification. They're like, hey, you're not exploiting things as much as you could be. it happens even on sandbox mode when, when you're not exactly hurting for the money, And so that's annoying. If you underwork your staff, if they don't have enough work to do, then they also get cranky and stressed. And I guess that is kind of how it is for some workers in real life, that they like to have jobs that are at least a little bit challenging and interesting. Complete and total boredom with nothing going on is not fun for a lot of workers. Frankly, I feel stressed all the time, even with minor responsibilities. That's a huge self-own right there. Personally, I don't see why somebody would get upset about not having a lot to do over work. Especially when you're doing the type of jobs that the staff members do in this game, where it's hands-on productive labor where they're walking around and doing things that are physical and carrying things, and so that doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, so like it encourages you to work your staff harder or to hire fewer staff for the same amount of work, So that's one thing that is kind of interesting about the game. And I just think it's kind of an interesting creative choice that's the relationship it has to the social reality of capitalism. Okay, so since this is a communist zoo, we have to immediately go and change all of the prices in the restaurants to free. Of course, I can do that on sandbox mode. And I like to be a nice capitalist when I'm doing sandbox mode, but I can be communist. Of course, any situation where one person is controlling anything is never communist. And in this game, you have even more control than any real life capitalist would have. Because in this game, you control every little minutia, including where you put the decorations and the color of the buildings and the design of the buildings and things like that. When in real life, capitalists obviously delegate that responsibility to a variety of different middle managers. So even in this one, you're even more dictatorial and tyrannical than even Elon Musk or whatever. And I can be nice when I'm playing on sandbox mode, but when I'm playing in the regular mode where you actually do have to deal with money, I turn into a mean capitalist. I find myself acting like a mean capitalist. The staff will all be showing that they're overworked, but I can't afford to hire a new one. My animals will have no toys, and I have to feed them the lowest quality of food, but I have to keep adding more animals to bring more people to the zoo so I can have more income. I have to exploit the animals, I have to exploit the workers, and cause harm in the process just so that I can keep things from going below zero. And of course that's true in the beginning of the game. Once you're playing for a while, then what happens is you reach that point where the quantitative becomes qualitative, and you become super rich, and suddenly you have money to do whatever you want, including increasing the pay of your workers. So I find myself doing that. And does that mean that I'm secretly a bad communist, and all of this is fake and I'm actually just another bourgeois loser? Maybe. But I think it's also important to remember that our class determines our politics, and the reason why that is because your class, what it is you do for a living, and the way you make your money, you just have to adopt your mindset to the reality of your job. And if my job is to be a capitalist, then I have to act like a capitalist. And it really goes to show that it's not individuals who are the cause of society's problems. Here I am, Miss Fight the Power, send all oil executives to prison, a communist girl. And the moment they give me a little bit of authority, I start acting like the meanest capitalist in the world. And yeah, maybe that's a character flaw on my part, but also, if I can switch that easily, just switch that paradigm so easily, it really goes to show that it's not the personality of bad actors that cause them to be bad, it's the systems that they operate in. And when I'm playing Planet Zoo under challenge mode, if I don't act like a ruthless capitalist, I don't get to break even, and I don't get to that part where my money just comes in super fast and where I no longer have to worry about cutting corners and cutting expenses. And, like, it's the same thing with, like, politicians. Like, I was trying to explain this, like, when people were talking about, like, the presidential elections, everybody was absolutely 100% certain that all of the bad things Trump was doing was because Trump was a bad guy, and if we just got rid of the bad guy, replaced him with a good guy, then everything would be fine. This is just my personal opinion, but from what I see in the media, obviously it's just from the media, and I don't actually know, but I think Barack Obama might be one of the nicest people in the world. Like, if you were to meet him and talk to them, like, I think he would just be like, the old trope of a politician you would want to sit down and have a beer with. Like, he hasn't had any, like, sex scandals or anything, and the Republicans worked really hard to dig up any dirt they possibly could find on him, and they found, like, nothing. It's freaky how squeaky clean he is, and, he just loves his wife and his kids, and all that, but, also, in political power, he was an absolute bastard. Like, he was absolutely ruthless and evil, and as bad as any Republican, the drone strikes programs, the mass deportations, the increase in the surveillance state, like, he was an absolute monster. And while I am convinced that he probably is a nice guy on a personal level, simply the fact that he became the person in charge of running this massive empire, he had to act like an emperor. He had to. Like, he didn't really get to not do that. And if he had tried, he probably wouldn't have lasted very long, When I'm playing this game, I saw a really tangible example of why it's not individuals that cause problems, it's systems. And unless we get rid of capitalism, we're not going to get rid of the exploitive nature of capitalism. It's not possible for a capitalist to just choose to be nice. They could, but it's not really actually that much of an option for them. But in sandbox mode, we get to have a communist zoo, or at least a communistic one. And I think that brings up another point, is like, you can't separate communism from scientific and technological progress. That was kind of like the whole point of, like, what Marx and Engels, like, one of the main points of their writing. The march toward socialism from capitalism is going to be a result of changing material reality, the way our economy functions, not just because we're purposefully doing it for political reasons, but because it's just an inevitable part of technological progress. Until we actually can create a world where there is no want, where there is no scarcity, and in my opinion, we're pretty damn fucking close to that. Until we can do that, we're not going to achieve that stateless, classless, moneyless society that we all are fantasizing of. You cannot separate socialism from technological advancement. And, I'm not saying that technological advancement is necessarily, in and of itself, always a good thing. Because, as technology has increased, sure, we have lots of ways that technology can help people. We have invented vaccines, we've cured cancer, we've invented the internet, but we've also invented, like, new ways to kill each other, new ways for the state to surveil us, new forms of control, and new methods and systems to take away people's agency and freedom. And that's the price we pay from stepping away from that primitive communism. And I don't know, I like the idea of developed communism a lot more than I do primitive communism. I have nothing against hunter-gatherers. I think obviously indigenous people should have a right to live their life in their traditional style, however they want to. But I also don't personally want to go back to that kind of life. I like living in the modern era. And, I want to live in a world where all the little luxuries that I have in the first world are available to everyone. we can use technology to solve even more problems, and we can use technology to create even less scarcity and want. And, I want fully automated luxury gay space communism. And I think we can have it if we just put our mind to it. That's a choice that we can make as a society. Of course, that doesn't necessarily change the fact that there is an element of this game that is, reactionary, that it is a game where the main appeal is a power fantasy, the fantasy of controlling other people and controlling a large amount of space. And, is a game like this something that could potentially exist in a post-revolutionary society? I don't know. The zoo games like this are pretty popular. I can't imagine it's gonna go very well if we try to just get rid of it. It's part of a little cultural revolution. Of course, the thing about the Cultural Revolution is that it was a populist movement, so we leaders of the socialist movement, look at me fancying myself some kind of leader, we may not necessarily get a choice over whether that happens, Ultimately, it's going to be the people who decide. But, I can't imagine people are gonna want to, get all angry at, a fucking zoo game. I hope there's Planet Zoo under socialism, because I like it, and I don't want it to go away. Maybe this is just me having a long justification for being nasty and bourgeois. But, the other thing is, what is the need that a game like this fulfills? Why is it appealing in the first place? And yeah, it's a power fantasy, but, where does that come from? Why do people like this idea of having this large amount of space, of territory that they can control and shape however they want? Where does that come from? And I think it honestly comes from the fact that a lot of us in real life, we don't have hardly any control over our lives at all. In this game, I can design everything the way I want, whereas in the apartment I rent, I'm not even allowed to paint my room. I'm not even allowed to put nails on the wall to hang things up. Even my choice of whether or not I have a pet, so literally the way that I shape my own family, that is under the authority of my landlord. When I'm at work, I don't have any choice about how I do my work. I have to do it the way I'm told, or I have to go home. And I'm talking about me, but this is kind of just how capitalism works in general. But your average worker doesn't get to, their opinion about how work should be done and how to do work better and how to do work in a more efficient, ethical, and less exhausting way. That isn't ever taken into account. So your average working class person controls basically no aspect of their life. When they go to work, they are under the control of the boss. When they come home, not even their own home is theirs to control. It's at the mercy of their landlord. And so it's really easy to see why the chance to have this little game where you can just control everything is so appealing, why it fills such a deep need that people have to have a sense of autonomy and control over their own surroundings. And the thing is, under socialism, once we get rid of class-based society, that reality of just not being in control of your own life, that's not necessarily gonna exist anymore. And, obviously you can't have infinite freedom. Obviously you can't just do whatever you want all the time. That's not gonna be what socialism is like. But at least, in a socialist workplace, you, the worker, are going to get a chance to have a democratic input over the way the workplace is run. There's lots of different ways that a socialist society could theoretically manage housing, but every person will have at least some ownership over their own home, either because they own it directly or because they own it as part of a collective, or at the very least it's publicly owned housing, which means that they get some say over it when they participate in democratic activity. So, people are going to have more say over their housing under socialism. And if there is, any rules and stuff that people have to follow in an apartment, it's going to be decided democratically. Obviously, people will still have to follow rules. Obviously, people aren't going to be allowed to run around doing whatever they want. But unlike under capitalism, the average person gets at least a chance to have their voice heard.
That's why I think socialism is important, I think people have a right to have a little bit of control over their own fate and control over their own world. And socialism really is about actual empowerment, actually putting practical power and decision-making power in the hands of the working class. And I think in a situation where people don't feel quite as helpless and quite as frustrated on a daily basis, the main thing that we're debating right now is a game like Planet Zoo going to exist under socialism? Well, I don't know if that power fantasy is going to be quite as appealing in a world where people actually do have a little bit of control over their lives. The fantasy is not going to be quite as appealing when the need that the fantasy represents is being satisfied. Does that make any sense? Hungry people fantasize about food. Full people do not. And I think one of the other reasons why Planet Zoo is so popular, it's not just about the fact that the player gets to control their own space and gets to control their own little empire. I think the most appealing part of this game is that people get to control their own labor. I think that just cannot be understated. When I'm at work, I don't necessarily get to choose the way that projects are designed. I barely even get to see the end product of what it is I'm creating or working on. I'm alienated from my labor at work. But in a game like this, when I take 4 hours to line up all of these little rocks like I'm doing right now, those get to be my little rocks. First of all, I get a choice about whether or not I do that work. And when the work is done, I get to enjoy the results, I get to enjoy having my little zoo the way I like it. And instead of somebody else telling me to do it and not giving me a choice about it. Marxists are not against work. We don't believe that work is bad. There is kind of this anti-work movement that is kind of speaking to people's resentment of capitalist exploitation, but the thing is work is also what makes us human. That's what one of Marx's philosophical beliefs is that the difference between a human and another animal is our ability to make creative decisions about how to modify our environment so that we can improve our own lives, that we can take something and create something that's more useful, more valuable than it was before. That's what defines humanity in Marx's opinion. I tend to agree a lot with that model. I do think that when people are doing work that they find to be satisfying and fulfilling, when they feel like they have a choice about how they do their work, the satisfaction of creating something, putting effort into something and getting a result, it brings people a happiness they can't get anywhere else. But when we don't have control over our work, when we don't have a choice about the work we do, when we don't get to see the finished products of our work or control what happens to those finished products, when we are alienated from our labor, that also alienates us from our own humanity. And that's why people hate Mondays, because that's why people hate Mondays. There is a technical term for the hatred of Mondays, and it's called the alienation of labor. It feels degrading and humiliating and dehumanizing when you don't get agency over your own work. But in a game like this, where all of my creative efforts are for me and me alone, and for anyone else I want to share it with via the internet, that satisfies a really deep need that a lot of people have. And I definitely feel like I'm a person who's just extremely creative. If I don't feel like I'm creating something, I get kind of sad, and I have to be creating something all the time. And I think that's one of the reasons why it was this game of all games that really got me addicted, because it does offer such an opportunity to be creative. I guess the question is, what might a socialist version of Planet Zoo look like? And yeah, it is kind of a cringy idea, not very socialisty to have a game where you wield large amounts of power over other people that you have not earned. But could a game like this have a progressive element or be modified in a way to make it more progressive. And I think it could be. I think it could be used for educational value. I mean, I know that I learned a lot about basic economics that you need to know in order to survive capitalist society when I played like Roller Coaster Tycoon and stuff as a kid. I learned about profit and revenue and things like that. So I definitely think that there could be an educational value. We could set up scenarios in such a way that would teach about like Marxist economic theory. You could have the player interact with the staff members in the game in such a way that emphasize the importance of workers to how the economy runs. Like, you could teach about like the labor theory of value. So like you could have a setup where like you could see like the amount that each worker produces, and then you could see how much the worker is getting paid, and so you could see how there's a difference there, and you could see very directly what each and every single worker is contributing to the game. I think there are other ways to at least have the reactionary elements of the game be less prominent. For example, maybe instead of a game where you are like this dictator where you determine everything yourself, well, you could change the way player interacts with the staff. Like, for example, maybe instead of, being able to fire and hire the staff, you could have a situation where the player has to negotiate with staff who are already there, and like maybe the staff come with the park when you first open it. And maybe the staff characters, maybe they can be part of like the decision making process. Like maybe like the notifications that come up, instead of being just blank notifications, they could be like a note from like one of the zookeepers, like, hey, I found this problem with this animal and you need to take care of it. Something like that. You could have the staff characters, have opinions or something. And, you could make or break the game based on your ability to make the staff happy. Maybe we could make the game like more collaborative. One thing that I was thinking recently is like, I'm sad that there isn't like a collaborative version or multiplayer version of this game. Like, me and my boyfriend really like playing video games together, and I'm like, oh man, I wish I could play Planet Zoo with you. But I guess not. I think it would be nice if there was a collaborative way that you could play this game. Maybe we could have a scenario where two people get to run a zoo together. There's different ways we could do it. They could have like one person run the economy while the other person manages the animals. We could have, or we could even have it where people get like equal amounts of like control over everything, like in a Google Doc collaboration where if one person writes something, another person has the option to delete it. And so the challenge would be, you and your buddy just have to negotiate together as adults. How are you going to use this space? How are you going to use your money and fulfill the goals of the scenario? So yeah, like I think a multiplayer version of the game might I think it would destroy a lot of friendships, but I think it also would be a lot of fun too. Another thing we could do is like maybe instead of you running the zoo all by yourself, you could have an option where instead of making a new zoo from scratch all the time, you could have the option to click and it'll randomly pull some other zoo that some other person made. And you can go off of their work. Obviously, the person would have to give permission for that. And maybe like the person could leave you notes about like, hey, make sure this animal gets fed, make sure this happens and that happens, things like that. So it ends up that like you have one zoo that lots of different people have worked on, and you can make it more social and collaborative in nature. And I think in some ways Planet Zoo already kind of is like that. It is a collaborative experience. There's the Steam workshop. People can actually post zoos that they made that other people can take and modify and play off of. People make little buildings and exhibits and stuff that are really pretty that they worked really hard on, and so that other people can use it. And also we have the mods that are not necessarily sanctioned by the creators of this franchise, where you can just add new animals. Like a lot of these dinosaur mods that I'm using come from, I think they're adapted from the Jurassic World Evolution series. So some genius, some king has done the hard work of like taking the program of an existing Planet Zoo animal, putting over the image of a dinosaur or another animal, and making it so that you can play that as a new animal, and they just put that hard work into it, and the designs look, beautiful, and they put a lot of effort into making it look nice. And there's also lots of other animals you can play too. Like you can play like a red wolf and a coyote, which are some of my favorite animals, but they don't have it in the base version of the zoo. So I downloaded mods to put those animals in my zoo. Did hear like a video once, I think it was from like Thought Slime or somebody, about how the internet is like communist because like it gives people an opportunity to enjoy work. It gives people an opportunity to express unalienated labor and share their labor freely, because on the internet, scarcity doesn't exist. There isn't a scarcity of mods that you can download. You can download any one you want, and the digital space required to do it is so cheap. Of course, the creators of this game, they probably don't care much for that because they are making a lot of money from the DLCs where you could buy new animals to put into the zoo. So you pay like $10 and then it'll give you a new, like 5 new animals to put in the zoo. And a lot of times the animals that they add for the DLC are ones that were already created by modders like 5 years ago, or however long this game's existed. Like, oh, like, there's a fennec fox mod, and then like a few months later they come up with the DLC where you can buy a fennec fox. So I think it does kind of cut into their profit margin. But, what are they going to do to stop it? The files are all there. You couldn't operate the game if the files weren't there. And so they just kind of have to live with that, I guess. And I think one of the sadder things that we've seen in capitalism in the last several decades is the closing of the internet commons. The fact that the vision of the internet was that it would be this collaborative space where people could work together for free and collaborate, and now everything on the internet is just taken over by ads and everything costs money. And software developers are working very hard to take away the little bit of control over people's devices and their digital experience, by, making phones that are locked when you buy them so you can't take it to a new provider, making things difficult to repair. So the closing of the digital commons has been a sad reality of capitalism. But, capitalism's not going to be around forever. So, we don't need to be sad about it forever. One day, the official Planet Zoo DLCs will also be mods. I don't know, and it's just like this celebration of unalienated labor is what it is. I mean, it's just beautiful. God bless Planet Zoo mods and the people who work very hard to make them.